In 2026, something happened in the world of technology that many people once believed was impossible. For decades, Linux was seen as the underdog, the system for developers, hobbyists, and rebels who wanted control over their machines. Windows, on the other hand, dominated the mainstream. It ruled offices, gaming rigs, schools, and corporations. It was pre-installed on almost every consumer laptop. It was the default. It was the standard, and yet, in 2026, Linux didn't just grow. It didn't just improve. It crossed a line that changed the balance of power in a way nobody expected. The question now echoing across the tech world is simple but powerful. Can Windows survive this shift? To understand how big this moment is, you have to understand how long Linux has been underestimated. For years, people said Linux was too complicated. They said it was fragmented. They said software support wasn't good enough. They said gaming would never work properly. They said drivers were unreliable. They said regular users would never switch because they were used to Windows, and for a long time those arguments worked. Windows kept its throne because it was familiar, because it had legacy support, because companies built their ecosystems around it. Linux improved slowly but steadily in the background, building momentum quietly, almost invisibly. But 2026 was different. This wasn't just incremental improvement. This was convergence. This was maturity meeting opportunity at exactly the right time. The first shock came from performance benchmarks. Across multiple hardware platforms, from low-end laptops to high-end gaming desktops, Linux distributions began outperforming Windows in real-world usage scenarios. Not synthetic tests. Not cherry-picked workloads. Real tasks. Boot times were faster. Memory usage was leaner. CPU scheduling was smarter. Battery life on laptops improved noticeably. Even average users who didn't understand kernels or system daemons could feel the difference. Their machines felt lighter, snappier, more responsive. For the first time, switching to Linux didn't feel like a compromise. It felt like an upgrade. Then came the gaming revolution. For years, gaming was Windows Fortress, DIRECTX, locked developers in. Anti-cheat systems resisted compatibility layers. Major publishers ignored Linux. But advancements in compatibility technology reached a breaking point. Translation layers became nearly flawless. Performance penalties shrank to almost nothing. Major anti-cheat vendors began officially supporting Linux builds. Game developers realized that maintaining Linux compatibility wasn't a burden anymore. It was simply good business. Suddenly, thousands of top-tier titles ran smoothly on Linux out of the box. Gamers who once laughed at the idea of leaving Windows began experimenting. And when they tried it, many didn't go back. At the same time, hardware manufacturers quietly shifted their stance. In previous years, Linux users often had to hope drivers would be reverse-engineered or community-maintained. In 2026, that narrative flipped. GPU manufacturers improved their Linux drivers dramatically. Laptop vendors started offering official Linux editions. Firmware updates became more transparent. Even peripheral makers began testing compatibility on Linux systems before release. The ecosystem started treating Linux as a first-class citizen rather than an afterthought. But performance and gaming alone wouldn't have been enough to shake Windows. The deeper shift came from trust. Throughout the early 2020s, users became increasingly concerned about privacy, telemetry, subscription models, and forced updates. Windows evolved into a service-heavy ecosystem. Cloud integration became mandatory rather than optional. Advertising elements crept into places people never expected. Licensing models became more confusing. Many users felt they were renting their computers rather than owning them. Linux, by contrast, represented control, transparency, freedom. In 2026, as data privacy regulations tightened globally and digital sovereignty became a political issue, governments and institutions began re-evaluating their dependencies. Several major public sector migrations to Linux were announced. Educational institutions followed. Enterprises exploring cost reductions realized that modern Linux desktop environments were stable enough, user-friendly enough, and supported enough to replace a significant percentage of Windows deployments. And something psychological happened. Linux stopped being the alternative. It started being the smart choice. User experience also transformed dramatically. Modern desktop environments became polished, consistent, and intuitive. Wayland matured, delivering smoother graphics and better security. Software centers improved to the point where installing applications felt as simple as on any commercial app store. Containerized package systems reduced dependency conflicts. Updates became seamless and less disruptive. The fragmentation argument lost its power because leading distributions aligned more closely on standards that matter to end users. Even content creators, once locked into Windows-only tools, found alternatives that were powerful and stable. Video editing, graphic design, music production, these fields saw steady growth in native Linux software. At the same time, browser-based tools and cross-platform frameworks reduced operating system dependency across the board. The operating system became less about exclusive software and more about performance, security, and philosophy. In offices, web-based productivity suites reduced reliance on platform-specific software. Remote work environments became OS-agnostic. Virtualization and containerization allowed legacy applications to run where necessary. For many companies, the question shifted from "can we switch?" to "why are we still paying so much not to switch?" Windows, of course, did not stand still. It evolved. It integrated AI features deeply into the operating system. It improved security layers. It refined its interface. But some of these changes divided users. AI assistants integrated at system level raised privacy concerns. Hardware requirements for new Windows versions excluded older machines. Subscription-based enhancements created friction. For power users especially, the sense of losing control intensified. Meanwhile, Linux embraced AI differently. Instead of locking it behind proprietary services, many distributions integrated open-source AI tools that users could run locally. Developers optimized Linux for machine learning workloads. The open ecosystem allowed experimentation without corporate gatekeeping. In research communities and startups, Linux became not just preferred, but assumed. By mid-2026, market share numbers began reflecting the shift. While Windows remained dominant overall, Linux desktop share crossed symbolic thresholds that analysts once dismissed as impossible. In some regions and sectors, Linux adoption surged into double digits. Online discussions changed tone. Tech influencers who once recommended Linux for enthusiasts only began recommending it for regular users. YouTube tutorials shifted from "how to survive on Linux" to "why I switched and stayed." The biggest transformation, though, was cultural. For years, Linux users had to justify their choice. In 2026, Windows users began justifying theirs. This inversion matters. It signals momentum. Can Windows survive this? The honest answer is yes, but not unchanged. Microsoft is one of the most resourceful technology companies in history. It has adapted before. It pivoted to cloud computing successfully. It embraced open source strategically. It integrated Linux into its own infrastructure through subsystems and server environments. It understands that ignoring Linux is not an option. But survival in this new era may require deeper change. It may require rethinking forced ecosystem lock-ins. It may require offering lighter, more privacy-respecting editions. It may require genuine interoperability rather than strategic containment. It may require acknowledging that users now have real alternatives, because that's what 2026 proved. Linux is no longer a niche experiment. It is no longer a backup plan. It is a viable, polished, powerful primary operating system capable of competing head-to-head. Another factor accelerating this shift is hardware longevity. Linux extended the life of older machines dramatically. Lightweight distributions allowed 5- and even 10-year-old laptops to feel usable again. In a world increasingly conscious about e-waste and sustainability, this mattered. Users realized they didn't need to buy new hardware just to satisfy operating system requirements. This practical benefit translated into economic savings, which translated into loyalty. Developers, too, found Linux increasingly attractive. Native development environments, container tools, scripting capabilities, and package managers made Linux an efficient platform for building software. As more developers chose Linux as their primary desktop, the ecosystem reinforced itself. Tools were optimized, documentation improved. Community support expanded. The education sector played a subtle but powerful role. Students exposed to Linux environments in schools and universities became comfortable with it early. When those students entered the workforce, they didn't carry the same Windows dependency habits as previous generations. Familiarity breeds adoption. Security also became a central narrative. Linux's permission model, open source transparency, And rapid patch cycles appeal to organizations worried about ransomware and large-scale exploits. While no system is invulnerable, the perception of control and visibility mattered. Security teams appreciated the granularity Linux offered. Meanwhile, Windows faced the challenge of balancing enterprise needs with consumer expectations. Maintaining backward compatibility while pushing modernization is complex. Supporting billions of devices with varying hardware configurations is not trivial. Linux distributions, by contrast, could focus more tightly on specific hardware profiles or use cases. Cloud infrastructure trends further blurred lines. With so many applications running in browsers or remote environments, the desktop operating system's role shifted. It became a gateway rather than the entire ecosystem. In that context, the advantages of a lightweight, customizable OS became more compelling. Perhaps the most surprising element of 2026 was the emotional shift among users. Switching operating systems used to feel risky. Now it felt empowering. Online communities shared migration stories. Step-by-step guides made transitions smoother than ever. Backup tools, migration utilities, and compatibility documentation matured. The narrative changed from Linux someday might compete to Linux already has. But Windows is not collapsing. It still dominates enterprise contracts. It still powers a massive installed base. It still has unmatched legacy software support in certain industries. The shift is not annihilation, it is rebalancing. The deeper question is not whether Windows will disappear. It's whether it will evolve fast enough to meet a user base that has tasted real choice. Choice changes everything. When users feel trapped, they tolerate friction. When they feel free, they demand excellence. Linux in 2026 delivered excellence in areas once considered weaknesses: usability, gaming, hardware support, stability, performance, and perhaps most importantly, identity. It stopped trying to mimic Windows and embraced its own philosophy while refining user experience. This wasn't magic. It was decades of incremental improvement reaching critical mass. Can Windows survive? Absolutely. But survival will require humility. It will require listening to users who value ownership over subscription. It will require balancing innovation with respect for user control. It will require competing on performance and transparency, not just ecosystem gravity. The impossible thing Linux did in 2026 was not overtaking Windows overnight. It was proving that dominance is not destiny. For the first time in modern desktop history, the average user can choose between two mature, powerful operating systems without feeling like one is a compromise. That equilibrium is new. That equilibrium is powerful. And once users realize they have options, the market never goes back to the way it was. The shift is not just technical. It is philosophical. It is economic. It is cultural. 2026 will be remembered as the year Linux stopped asking for permission and simply stepped forward. The real story is not about one system defeating another. It's about competition returning to a space that had grown comfortable. It's about innovation accelerating because pressure increased. It's about users reclaiming agency. Windows can survive. It can adapt. It can even thrive in this new landscape. But it can no longer assume loyalty. It must earn it. And that might be the most important change of all. The impossible wasn't that Linux improved. The impossible was that millions of everyday users noticed. And once they noticed, everything changed.